Hi, this is Sarah Thomas from Sariditty, and I am so happy to share with you some of my favorite tips for foundation paper piecing. I have found there are so many different ways to do foundation paper piecing, but I have figured out what works for me the best. And in my sewing room, I have a very similar setup to what you're gonna see here, where I will have my sewing machine right in front of me, and off to the side, I'll have my wool pressing pad and a little mini iron, and then off to the left, I'll have my cutting area as well. So everything kind of stays right in front of me when I'm actually doing the paper piecing part. I also have two rotary blades that I use for foundation paper piecing. I'll have one that is specific to the fabric, and then I'll have another one that I use strictly to cut the paper out. I do use a friction pen to mark my fabric before I do any cutting, but I'm gonna show you how to properly use friction pens in this case. I'm also gonna use a colored pencil. This is a Sewline pink pencil. That way you'll see how I can color coordinate my papers so I never get anything wrong with where the fabric pairs up on my patterns. I love the add a quarter ruler. This is the 12-inch in yellow. There's other colors. I love the pink one. And then there's the add a quarter plus ruler, which I will show you. It is very handy. I personally love my engraved tailor's clapper. Any tailor's clapper is wonderful. Obviously, I love the ones that I engrave. But what it is going to be helpful for is this raw wood. This is oak. When we press our seams and we set the clapper over the seam, it's going to absorb and pull out all of that heat and any moisture you may use, and you're going to get perfectly flat seams. I have a wool press pad off to the side, and then I also have a mini iron that I keep handy. Another key thing that I really can't impress upon enough is the difference between normal printer paper and newsprint paper. Normal printer paper, and you can feel it, it's just a little bit sturdier and heftier as opposed to newsprint. So if you've ever held a newspaper and you can tell the difference, this is why. So it's gonna sew a little bit easier, and it's also going to rip out after the fact in a better method. So where I get my newsprint, you can definitely shop at your local quilt store. If they carry foundation paper packs, that's great. I personally like to go through dickblick.com. I don't have one near me, so I shop online. Dick Blick is an arts and crafts supply store, and so I buy reams of newsprint online, and I'll get 4 or 5 reams at a time for about $8 a ream. It's very affordable. It runs through your inkjet or your laser printer just like normal paper would. It comes on an 8.5 by 11 size, and it's exactly what I use and what I love. Last but not least is this lightbox you see underneath me. So I personally like the Daylight Company brand. This is actually a translucent cutting mat that is sitting on top of it. And so the lightbox is gonna be really helpful for me to prep my pattern pieces and really make sure I use as least amount of fabric as possible. So my method for foundation paper piecing really is to save as much fabric as I can. That way I can keep using it for more projects. All right, let me show you how I start into my foundation paper piecing process. I'm gonna grab this pattern right here. It's only 3 pieces, as you can see, 1, 2, and 3. And actually, if you are familiar with my book, Rainbow Quilt Color Method, this pattern piece comes directly from the roulette pattern. So I'm gonna show you in my book, there are a handful of patterns that do have foundation paper piecing. Here are all 15 quilts that are in the book. So that in mind, I want you to know that Lifesaver has some foundation paper piecing, not all. Same thing with Fan Dancer, it has some foundation paper piecing, and both of these are extremely simple, I promise you. Roulette, which is what we are going to use this pattern piece from, it has some foundation paper piecing, and also what you can't see are some smaller triangles that go along the top and bottom of it. Trickle has foundation paper piecing, and while it looks more complicated, it's a very simple pattern because it's the same block on repeat, left to right, left to right. Kaboom has just minimal foundation paper piecing. And then Sweet Tooth, which is the medallion, it has some foundation paper piecing where you see some of these bits that I've already shown you in other patterns. So it's definitely very safe to say that foundation paper piecing is one of my favorite methods for piecing, and here's why. You cannot mess up sewing on a line that is already drawn out for you. There's no second guessing if your seam is too scant, too large. This is the seam, it's always gonna be perfect. All right, I've already shown you this paper pattern that we're gonna do our example on, and just so you are aware, in my book, there's sort of an overview recap of how to do foundation paper piecing, and this is the exact same piece that we're using. So right now I'm showing you exactly what page 21 in my book is gonna explain to you. When you are looking at your foundation paper patterns, the lines that you see, and anytime you can see letters or numbers, that's gonna be the wrong side of the finished block or the finished unit. So I'm gonna show you with fabric laying out exactly what I mean. You can see the print on the fabric. This is the wrong side. So when everything is said and done on this piece, all you're going to see on this side is the wrong side of the fabric, and everything you're gonna see on the other side will be the right side of the fabric. And what you see now is nothing. It's totally blank. Now, some methods will tell you to do all these extra steps. I'm gonna skip all of that and save you some time and energy. Just always make sure that where you see the lines in any writing, that is the wrong side of the fabric. So let's prep our piece. I know that in this block, I wanna have my triangle, my number 1, be the main focal point for me. It may be different for you. And then I want numbers 2 and 3 to just be sort of the background that frame around my triangle. I do want to use this print for my number 1. And if you can tell how this is very easy to fussy cut out a certain letter, I'm going to show you how the lightbox helps with both fussy cutting and also for minimal fabric usage. So if you turn your lightbox on, and I like it to be on the brightest setting possible. Now remember, this is the wrong side of the fabric. So if I leave it where the lines are showing upward, I need to have the wrong side of the fabric facing me. And since my name is Sarah, we're gonna find the S. I'm gonna position that S right in the center of my triangle. So hopefully you can see how my letter S is right in the middle of my triangle. And yes, there's other stuff around it, but I want the S centered. Or maybe you're using a really pretty flower or a really cute motif of an animal or a face or something like that. This is how you can set it up in the center of your design. When we stitch, we still use a 1/4 inch seam, but I'm gonna cut myself just outside of a 1/4 inch seam. So I personally go with 3/8 of an inch now that I'm comfortable, but I would say if you're new to this, give yourself about 1/2 an inch. You can use your ruler and set it down and draw outside of that line by 1/2 an inch, or you can eyeball it as well. So if I'm outside of my line by about 1/2 of an inch, same thing over here, I'm outside of this line, about 1/2 of an inch, and I do extend past the dashed lines, so I do want to show you that again. I build into all of my foundation paper patterns, I will build you in a 1/4 inch seam for the seam allowance when you're trimming. Not all foundation patterns will do that, so always make sure that you know where your seam allowance is going to be when you make the full block. Alrighty, so I'm going to set that S centered down into here. I'm outside of my seam allowance, just a little bit, maybe 1/8 of an inch to maybe a 1/4 of an inch. And that way I still have a little bit of wiggle room when it's all said and done and I can trim the block to size. So this is perfectly laid out to be my number 1 piece. And in the corner of my seam allowance, I'm using a friction pen. I'm gonna write the number 1 because this is piece number 1. Now here's where I'm very, very, very strict on the use of a friction pen. It does go away with heat when you use the iron later, but it's still a chemical. So if you ever have it on a part of the fabric that could ever be seen, I would not recommend using it. I personally will only use it when it's in a seam allowance or going to get trimmed off, okay? So this is piece 1, and I'm just gonna set this aside. Then pieces 2 and 3, I need to get my background fabric ready. I'm actually going to keep using the fabric from this bundle so it all matches. So go ahead and grab your fabrics that you want to use and come back. I have chosen this fun blue with a little bit of a windy free motion quilting type print on it to be my background. And I'm going to use the same background for numbers 2 and 3. Again, if you are new to this, I recommend giving yourself as much help as possible. So I will grab a colored pencil. And since these are going to be the same, I'm just going to go ahead and circle both numbers 2 and numbers 3 in the colored pencil, so I know that both of those pieces are going to be from the same fabric. If you have a pattern piece that has a lot of different sections to it, I still will go through and I'll write down white, pink, green, or I'll use colored pencils to circle the numbers, so that way I always have some sort of idea of which of my fabrics is going to match up with those numbers. So again, remember, this is our wrong side of the fabric. So we need to take our fabric and put it to the wrong side up, all right? This is why I like having the lines of my paper upward instead of downward. This way the light's shining through the ink just a little bit more clearly. So my fabric is upside down, and I'm going to line it up with number 2. Again, we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So where I join, I'm joining from 1 to 2 when I sew them. So this is the seam I want to look at and keep in mind. So I'm going to lay my fabric over that 1 to 2 seam, and I'm going to make sure it's 1/4 of an inch overlapped. If you're new to this, grab yourself your ruler and you can line up that 1/4 inch and make sure you're right there. But this way I know that my 1/4 inch seam is built in. And again, just like I did piece number 1, I'm going to draw a line slightly outside of that seam allowance, so I know when I trim it's all set outside of my seam allowance. And then here's that number 3 line, again, about 3/8 to 1/2 an inch outside of that. And I'm going to write down piece number 2 right there. I can see that nice and clearly. I'm going to use the same fabric over here. So now when I take this piece, I'm looking at this line right here as my seam line. So 1 to 2 becomes one piece, and now we're going this section to number 3. So I am going to rotate. Again, I like to save fabric. So if I have my line on my fabric where I'm going to cut it out, I know that this is going to be my free raw edge. So I'm going to lay that free raw edge 1/4 of an inch across that seam, which I know it's difficult to see. So that seam right here, I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch to this side of it. Lay it down, nice and easy. I'm going to extend it up to the seam allowance. Here's my seam allowance out here, so I know I'm going to have plenty of room. And that's going down. So this whole piece right here will be my piece number 3. So you can see how I've gone ahead and saved fabric right here by using a similar neighboring seam to cut 2 different pieces. And if I use a bigger template, a bigger foundation pattern that has lots of pieces, this is how I truly save fabric, is because I'm able to look and plot out where all of my fabric pieces are going to go. All right, we have drawn all 3 of our pieces. So we have piece 1, piece 2, piece 3. I do this for the entire block. I have a pattern called Arrow Star that consists of 25 individual blocks all joined together. What I did was for each of the foundation portions of those 25 blocks, I went through and I cut all of the piece 1s and I put them in a stack. All of the piece 2s and I put them in a stack. So that way I could just easily grab from each stack and just keep the assembly line going. Let's go ahead and cut out our pieces. So we come over to the cutting mat, and if you need a ruler, use the ruler. But again, you built in enough wiggle room that if you're off slightly, it's not the end of the world. I just would not be off on the inside of the line. I would go to the outside of the line. All right, piece 1, I'm just gonna set it down. Let's do pieces 2 and 3. Now, since my 2 to 3 line is a shared line, I am actually going to use a ruler to cut that one because I do want to ensure that my 1/4 inch seam is as accurate as it can be. Here's piece 3. And you know what? Good enough because I'm right within those lines, piece 2. And so this is why it's really helpful for me to put the numbers. I'm just going to put them in order. 1, 2, 3. There's no second guessing what I'm doing. And now I can flip them right side up and they're in order for me. 1, 2, 3. There's one more little tool I didn't tell you to have, and that's a glue stick. So you can definitely use a Sewline glue stick, which is great for English paper piecing and then foundation paper piecing. To be honest, I buy washable glue sticks, the Elmer's kind, and they work just great. If you do the Elmer's glue, the washable glue, I suggest getting the clear version and not the purple because again, it's a dye, and just in case anything were to happen with a white fabric, I don't want to be responsible for that stain. Alrighty, we're going to use the lightbox again. Turn it on. We're sewing on this side with the lines because that's the wrong side of the pattern. So now we're going to position on the right side. All right. I'm going to go ahead and dot just a little bit of this glue on my piece so that way my very first piece of fabric, I'm using the lines coming up through the lightbox to position my letter S right in the center and ensure that I am completely safe within those seam allowances that I have the extra fabric hanging over. And if you want to use a seam roller here to really press down, that's fine. I would not use your fingers to smooth because I'm afraid that would stretch and pull your fabric. So either gently blot, use a seam roller, or sometimes I flip it over so I'm rubbing on the paper. And I'll just make sure that that glue is tacked down that way. All right. So remember, we're going to go from piece 1 to piece 2. And we do want a 1/4 inch. So clearly this is more than a 1/4 inch hanging over right here. So this is where we're going to do the first trimming. I would say grab a piece of cardstock, or if you have the add a 1/4 plus ruler, it actually has a tapered edge down here that you can use as the cardstock. So let's come over to the cutting mat. I know that this is positioned correctly, so I don't need to do anything else. I'm going to lay that tapered edge up against my line that I'm going to trim. So piece 1 to piece 2. Lay the tapered edge over to it. Fold the template back. Okay? Once it's folded back, you can pull that ruler away, or if you're using cardstock, just leave the cardstock in place. Then the lip on the add a 1/4 ruler is going to fit right up against that fold in your template. And that's the little bit of trim that you need to take off. Our paper's out of the way. We have a nice 1/4 inch trim, and you're gonna see now, coming up through the light box, you can see that there's a 1/4 inch of fabric overhanging my piece 1 to piece 2 seam. So now to position piece number 2. This is piece 2, it's next in line. We know that we put them in order. I always lay it right side up first so I see where to position it. Then I'm going to place it right sides together. I always do a finger fold of a 1/4 inch just to make sure I have it in the right spot, because if I'm not careful, I may need to actually bring it this way. Can you see how I'm not quite up here where my seam allowance is? So I'm going to scooch it over this direction. And now I know that when I go to trim it, I have all of my seam allowances covered. So carefully flip that back, right sides together. My edges are lined up. And if you want to use a straight pin right here to hold it, you can. Otherwise, very carefully handle that. We're going to take it to the machine. You're going to flip it over. And I want you to sew this seam line. Before you sew the seam line, here are 2 things to make note of. 1, you're going to want to lower your stitch length considerably. You're probably used to sewing about a 2.0 to a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. I personally bring mine down to about 1.2 millimeters. This is why I do that. We're essentially perforating the paper. So when it's all said and done, it's easier to rip those templates out and not rip up the stitches themselves. It's basically integrity for the sewing, and your seams will stay intact. So I want you to sew along this line. Keep in mind, anytime you have a seam allowance, you can stitch to your heart's delight outside of that seam allowance. It doesn't matter to me if you just go up to the seam allowance or way out here. But anytime you have an intersection that is still within the block going to another piece, I recommend stopping at that point and doing one more stitch. So for my machine, when I hit the tie off button, it takes one more stitch and then it ties for me. You don't want to go too far past that, because when you're ready to sew this piece, it's going to end up ripping your template paper. That's why. So go ahead, go to your machine, set up your stitch length to about 1.2, maybe 1.5 at the largest. And I would stitch along this line and then stop right about one stitch past the intersection. I stitched my first intersection between pieces 1 and 2. You can see I started out here outside of my seam allowance, and I came forward, and I have a thought for you. I would not backstitch, because we're already at such a small stitch length that backstitching, it's not necessary. But another reason, there will come a time where you have an oopsie moment and you do have to rip this out and do it again. It's not fun to rip out 1.2 millimeter backstitch stitches. I can attest to that. All right, so I've stitched and I ended one stitch past my intersection. I'm gonna turn the light box back on. You can see it. I have my nice 1/4 inch overhang here. So this is now where I just sort of pivot over to my pressing pad, open it up, and I just press that seam down in place. Nothing special. I don't have to do anything other than just press that seam into place. And remember, if you have a tailor's clapper or a pressing block, I'm going to use this, and a lot of them are heavy enough that if you just set it on there, it's enough pressure to pull out that heat. I feel like if I do it extra hard, maybe it'll be extra flat. I don't know. All right, so you can see how, and if you feel your tailor's clapper, it's warm. It has pulled out that heat, and I have a really, really nice flat seam right here that's not gonna pucker up on me when I am done with the block. So this is my right side up. Now we're gonna get ready to do number 3. So remember, we have to trim and prep before we do our piece. Here's our overhang. This is the seam on which we're going to stitch. So let's come over here to the cutting mat. Lay either your cardstock against the next line you're going to do, or that tapered edge of your add a 1/4 plus. Fold the paper against it and crease it down. It's creased in place. Go ahead and take the lip of that ruler against your crease. And that's my trim. So do you see what I mean about minimal fabric waste? They're very, very small pieces because I prepped well and I planned well. All right, I'm gonna come back here. There's my seam, there's my allowance. All right, right side's up, right side's up. I'm gonna lay it in place. Go ahead and fold it right sides together. And then remember that finger press that I really think is important to do. And I have this in the right position. All of my seam allowances are covered right where it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it back. And I promise you, the more you do this, the more it will seem like second nature to where you can eyeball a 1/4 inch seam. All right, you can straight pin it if you want, or just take it very carefully to your machine. And now you're gonna stitch this line. And since it goes from seam allowance to seam allowance, you can stitch the whole thing and it doesn't matter where you start, where you stop. I will see you back here in a minute. We have stitched our final line. So we've joined pieces 1 and 2 to piece 3. I'm gonna go ahead and flip it. There's my beautiful seam because we trimmed ahead of time. Everything's all done. So now we just need to press that into place. And I love the wool pressing mats. The way they absorb the heat, it's almost like you're getting a press from underneath as well. and then sucking out that heat as fast as I can to really leave a crisp, flat seam. I like coming up with fun little phrases, but if you want your name on it or a pretty flower or something, I'm happy to customize them for you. They're all made in the USA, up in Massachusetts. My friend Ray hand carves them from oak, and then he polishes them. They're very smooth. We have a nice rounded edge on them, so if you happen to have a pesky lump in your blocks, you can use that edge to massage the seam down instead of getting out the hammer and saying little prayers and doing rain dances. All right, we have our block. Everything is pressed, it is cool, everything is covered. You can see through the light box that all of my fabric is surrounding my seam allowances. So now that this piece is done, I'm just going to trim it up. And so any ruler you have, quilter's ruler, your outer quarter ruler, whatever works, for my patterns, I'm gonna have you trim just on the seam allowance line. And so again, you can see that by prepping these pieces ahead of time and putting them in that assembly line, do you see how by prepping our pieces, we have such minimal fabric waste? And now you have so much more fabric on hand to use for the next project. That's one of my favorite things about doing it this way. I feel like I'm not wasting as much fabric as some of the other methods I have seen or tried. All right, everything is trimmed. We're gonna flip it over. My S is perfectly situated. I love that. And there's a little Morse code for the letter S. But this is the exact way I do my foundation paper piecing. And this is one of the blocks in the roulette quilt. So now I guess I need to go make about 24 more of those and make roulette with the high flight fabric. So we just talked about how to do a small paper template, which is great. But now let's talk about doing a larger template. I love bigger templates. I love bigger blocks. Not everything I do is small. So here's a block that I'm working on right now that is large enough that I had to divide it into 2 printings. So obviously piece C is small enough to do just like we did. And that one's, you can visualize it, piece 1, piece 2, piece 3, and there's your seam allowance. But let's talk about pieces A and B. Before I do anything, I'm going to grab my 4 paper rotary cutter, and I'm going to trim outside those seam allowances. It doesn't need to be perfect at all. I'm gonna set piece C aside. So now I have this piece and this piece that I'm going to join to the other 2 pieces that are cut off on the other page. Good enough there, good enough there. And yes, you see this little 1-inch guy here? On all of my patterns, I will include a 1-inch checkbox. Please, please print your patterns at 100% and not scaled to fit when your printing options come up. So you can test it here. It's a 1-inch block. I have piece A and piece A over here, and then I have piece B and piece B. So we're gonna use the light box again, and what I find the most handy reason of having washi tape. It's not so sticky that you can't sew through it and gum up your needles, because you won't, but it's sticky enough that it's gonna hold these newsprint papers together. So I will use the light box, and I'm gonna align my lines where they overlap. I will always make sure that you can overlap and get everything aligned where you need it. And I'm gonna grab my washi tape, put it right here, and it's thin enough too that when I go to sew my lines, I can see through that, okay? So it's taped there, and it is gonna be taped on the back. I wanna show you this fun washi tape. Do you see the airplanes on it and the rainbow? So the rainbow is a nod to the Rainbow Spice fabric, and this washi tape goes with the High Flight collection. So you have airplanes ready for takeoff, the planes flying into the sun, and then you still have the rainbow from Rainbow Spice in there. And you can get a hold of me if you want one, or perhaps if you get anything from my shop that has to do with High Flight, you might get a roll with it. So we have our papers washi taped together. It doesn't have to be along the whole seam. You see there's a spot there that's open, but for the most part, everything is joined. And now I'm gonna treat this pattern piece just like I did the smaller block, and I'm gonna lay out all of my fabrics. Let me just show you this really quickly. I'm not gonna do it, but I'm gonna show you. I know that this one right here is going to be part of my airplane, so I'll just say blue. This here is part of the airplane tail, so I'll say black. Or I'll grab my blue colored pencil and my black colored pencil. These guys out here I know are background, so maybe I just want to do this to denote where my background fabric is going to be. Now when I go through the same process I did on this block for fitting and drawing all my fabric pieces, I know exactly which fabric belongs to which one. I can do them in order of fabric and not in the order of the numbers. So since 5, 2, 3, and 6 are all the same background fabric, I'll go ahead and prep and cut those all together. I want to thank you so much for checking in with me today and learning maybe a new way to do foundation paper piecing. It's definitely my favorite way. And if you happen to use this method on your own and you post pictures or video, tag me. I want to see what you make. I love hearing everyone's success stories in trying this method. And if you want to follow me or see new photos of other patterns, I'm on Sariditty.com, Facebook, Instagram. You'll find me, Sariditty. See you next time.